Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a massive geopolitical shift that's literally rewriting the rules of the global order. It's a story of shifting power dynamics. We're talking immense collective strength, deep internal rivalries, and a strategic expansion that's actively challenging traditional Western dominance. The stakes here? Absolutely global. To really grasp our international politics' heading, we've got to understand the mechanics of BRICS.
Okay, let's dive into this. 42%. Now, that isn't just some random trade statistic. That represents 42% of the entire human population. Think about that for a second. Nearly half of the globe's citizens live under the governance of just 5 core nations. If you're wondering why this coalition demands the world's attention, well, it starts right there with that staggering human capital.
Section 1. The Rise of the BRICS. You know, the evolution of this bloc is absolutely fascinating, mostly because it actually started out as just a concept, long before it became a political reality. Back in 2001, Goldman Sachs coined the acronym BRIC. They were predicting that these specific emerging economies would collectively dominate global growth by 2050. Fast forward to 2010, South Africa joins the mix, giving us BRICS with an S. By 2017, they're already tossing around the idea of a BRICS Plus expansion, and by 2021, their financial arm, the New Development Bank, is out there actively expanding its membership.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why that initial 2001 prediction held so much water. When you look at the sheer demographic scale, it's pretty undeniable. With 42% of the global population locked in against the rest of the world's 58%, their dominance is baked right in. Plus, keep in mind, all 5 of these core members are also highly influential players over in the G20.
Now, global dominance is usually judged on a few specific parameters, and BRICS commands a massive chunk of the pie across the board. Together, they control 30% of the world's territory, they produce 23% of global GDP, and they handle 18% of all global trade. To put that economic weight into perspective, just look at their global GDP rankings. China sits at number 2 in the world. India is 5th. Brazil is 9th. Russia comes in at 11th and South Africa at 35th. It is a truly formidable concentration of power.
But actually, scratch that whole idea of uniform strength. The reality is way more complicated when you look under the hood. The growth powering this bloc is incredibly uneven. China is cruising along, growing at around 6%, and India is right behind at 4.5%. Those two are the primary engines here. But then you've got Russia sitting at 1.7%, Brazil lagging at 1.2%, and South Africa barely inching forward at a 0.1% growth rate. So yeah, they might share a table, but they are absolutely not moving at the same speed.
Still, despite those uneven growth rates, they've managed to score some massive collaborative successes, effectively stepping up as a unified voice for developing nations. They cooperate on everything from counterterrorism to food and energy security. For instance, you have the BASIC group, which is basically BRICS without Russia, who met up in Spain back in December 2019 to solidify mutual support for the Paris Climate Agreement. And then there's their New Development Bank. It's highly active, famously approving a whopping $250 million loan to finance renewable energy projects in India.
Section 2. Cracks in the foundation.
So, shifting gears a bit, structurally, one of the most profound differences within BRICS is their political heterogeneity. Think about long-lasting, highly integrated unions like the EU. They rely heavily on political homogeneity. Their members share similar democratic frameworks, right? Well, BRICS completely lacks this. You've got democratic systems in India, Brazil, and South Africa trying to strategically align with the authoritative governance of China and Russia. It creates fundamentally different, sometimes clashing, approaches to governance, law, and international diplomacy.
And it's not just political styles. The bloc is geographically fragmented across 4 entirely different continents, which makes seamless integration, well, incredibly difficult. But the bigger issue? There's a severe lack of mutual trust. China and India have active, ongoing territorial rivalries. Meanwhile, Russia and Brazil are locked in direct economic competition over mining resources. These internal fractures make it incredibly hard for them to act like a single, unified global institution.
And then there's the elephant in the room, the overwhelming dominance of China. Because of its massive GDP and trade relations, BRICS often functions less like a union of equals and way more like a China with partners group. China actively leverages its own parallel organizations, things like the One Belt One Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, to dictate terms and project its influence. Trust me, the other members are acutely aware of this massive power imbalance.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because it begs a massive question. If the foundation of this core group is already showing all these visible cracks, and there's this deep-seated internal distrust, why on earth are they actively trying to add more members to the mix?
Section 3. The BRICS Plus expansion. Now, this expansion wasn't just some overnight thing. It really kicked off back in 2017, when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi first floated the idea to widen their quote-unquote circle of friends to enhance South-South cooperation. The first operational step happened in 2021 when the new development bank admitted Bangladesh, the UAE, Uruguay, and Egypt. Soon after, major players like Iran and Argentina formally applied, while nations like Indonesia and Egypt were also signaling some strong early interest. The momentum was definitely building.
So what's the strategy here? Well, from a geopolitical standpoint, the rationale for this expansion is largely being driven by Russia and China. They are impartially observing a heavily churning international order, one that's been heightened by things like Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the perceived ineffectiveness of current multilateral organizations. Russia, having been pushed out of the G7, along with China, sees a huge opportunity to capitalize on this churn. They want to exploit visible cracks in G20 solidarity to actively challenge Western influence and the traditional domain of the G7.
When you look closely at exactly who is being invited, their strategy becomes crystal clear. China and Russia are heavily prioritizing nations with regional clout and G20 credentials to create strategic cleavages. They invited Kazakhstan to anchor Central Asia and looked to Nigeria and Senegal to solidify a foothold in Africa. But here's an interesting detail. When you look at the MICTA group, that's Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia, only Indonesia received an invite. It's a highly calculated move to handpick specific allies straight out of the G20.
Section 4. Internal power struggles.
As you might guess, this expansion is exposing some massive internal rivalries. The IBSA nations, India, Brazil, and South Africa, are deeply anxious about what this means for their own status. Brazil is highly uncomfortable because it views Argentina strictly as a regional rival. South Africa is absolutely terrified that admitting heavyweights like Nigeria or Egypt will strip away its unique status as the sole African representative. And India? India is incredibly frustrated because, despite having good relations with many of the invitees, it was largely sidelined and not properly consulted on an expansion process driven almost entirely by Beijing and Moscow.
India's position in all of this is incredibly complex. For them, BRICS is this super delicate geopolitical balancing act. On one hand, India uses its membership to elevate its global profile, dehyphenating itself from Pakistan and forcing an engagement with China as a supposed equal. They absolutely need this platform to remove roadblocks for their ultimate goals, getting membership in the UN Security Council and the Nuclear Suppliers Group. But at the exact same time, India is warily trying to balance the increasingly aggressive closeness between Russia and China.
So the crucial point is exactly this. If India, Brazil, and South Africa want to maintain their geopolitical leverage, they simply cannot afford to be passive passengers. They have to ensure that any expansion isn't dictated solely on Chinese terms, and that any middle powers admitted are equally receptive to their own interests, not just Beijing's. The IBSA countries must actively assert their presence, or they risk watching BRICS transform into nothing more than a Sino-Russian echo chamber.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question as we watch this new era unfold. We are looking at a bloc with the demographic and economic muscle to fundamentally rewrite global rules. But as we've seen, it's built on a shaky foundation of profound distrust, competing governance models, and fierce regional jealousies. So what does this all mean? Will BRICS successfully reshape the global order, or will it ultimately fracture under the crushing weight of its own internal rivalries? It's a geopolitical tightrope, and the whole world is watching to see if they fall. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you next time.